Okay, I need to fill you guys in on what I'm up to. I'm about 10 or 20%, maybe 15% into a project that I'm working on. I'm building a new enclosure or sort of redoing an enclosure for my day gecko. I filmed what I've done so far. I just haven't sat down and explained what I'm doing. So I think this will probably be more of a series rather than just one video. As far as I can tell at this point, I think I'd like to just do it in a few different parts. But let me explain to you why I'm doing this. So if you follow my stuff and follow my content, you know that I have a podcast. And over the past 3 to 4 months, I've really started to learn a ton about quality of care and how to improve the care of the animals that we keep in captivity. And, you know, especially my conversation with John Courtney Smith from Arcadia, talking about wildlife recreation, that really helped push the needle into this direction. I was already doing some bioactive stuff, and I've always been a proponent of giving enrichment and proper enclosure sizes, but just in the last 3 months I've realized, and this is what I said when I was talking to John on the podcast, that as soon as I started reading his book, I realized I had too many animals. I only have 6 animals, but right away it made me realize how much work it takes and how much investment of time and money needs to go into each animal's enclosure in order to really give them the most potential life. And I'm not keeping my animals in small tubs / rack systems. I know that's a whole controversial area. I'm not saying racks are terrible in their entirety, but for most people, I don't think that they're right. And I have tons of talking about that on my podcast. I'm not going to get into it right now, but I do have large enclosures with natural substrate and lots of enrichment. But even with that, it's just not enough. And so I'm going to start doing one at a time. And I've had some really good conversations lately in my podcast. I don't know when you're seeing this, so I don't know if some of these podcasts are released yet. I'll let you know, or you'll be able to go check right now. But I had a conversation with Ryan McVeigh from Zilla. I had a conversation with Sam Parrott from Herp Bites magazine. I had a conversation with Peter from Reptelligence, which was a really interesting conversation about teaching and learning in reptiles. And I had a conversation with Josh Halter from the BioDude. And all these and all the podcasts I've done up to this point have been fantastic, but those ones specifically have really helped me hone in on some of the areas that I can improve. So I really want this series to show kind of how much work goes into a reptile, but sort of the payoff in the end. And right now my dead gecko is 12 years old. She's 11 or 12 years old. I don't know how old she is. I got her when she was 5 or 6 from a breeder, and she might only have 2 or 3 years left in her, but maybe she has 8 or 9 years left in her. I don't really know. So either way, I want to make sure that she has a good quality of life in front of her. And she's in a nice bioactive 18 by 18 by 24 Exoterra right now, but there's some things I want to change about her enclosure, and that's what we're going to do here with that knowledge I've developed through talking with all these different experts on the podcast. And look, to be completely honest, I don't have the time or the money to completely go all out on every enclosure for every animal that I have. That's just the case. And I'm guessing that many people are in the same conditions. So my plan is to take one thing at a time. Start with my dead gecko, move maybe to my crested gecko, go to my boas, and I want to add better lighting in those enclosures, and so on and so on and so on. But it needs to be one step at a time. And I think a lot of us are in that situation where we just ended up having more animals than we can afford to have, to put it simply. And it's not that any of my animals are suffering, but I just want to do a better job. And we're going to start here. So with my day gecko, day geckos are arboreal species. You hear that all the time, and that is absolutely true. I have never seen my day gecko on the floor of her enclosure. Now, my crested gecko, who's also an arboreal species, I see him on the floor. Once in a while he's crawling around the floor. I don't think anything of it. If I were to see my day gecko on the floor of her enclosure, I would know something's wrong with her. Like, once you know your animals, you understand their behavioral patterns. That's just one thing that if I saw, I'd be like, oh my God, there's something wrong. So, but here's the thing that I've learned with arboreal species is that when you talk about arboreal species, quite often people say tall enclosures are what you want for arboreal animals. But what I've noticed with this specific day gecko, I don't know if this is all day geckos, this is my day gecko, my giant day gecko, this is how she behaves. It doesn't matter how tall the enclosure is for her. She just uses the top 20% or so, the top 20 to 30%. I've had her in a 3-foot tall enclosure. She just used the first foot or so or less. And now I have her in a 2-foot tall enclosure, same thing. She uses about, you know, the top 8 or 10 inches. So for me, I've realized that it's not about climbing height so much for her. I think it's going to be more lateral space in an arboreal plane. So it's not that I need to have, you know, a tall, narrow enclosure. She's just going to use that top chunk of the enclosure anyway. Instead, I want to get some space off the ground, but give her more arboreal type, canopy type scenario above the ground to allow her to move this way, but still off the floor, if you know what I mean. So what I did is I went and picked up a screen enclosure from Zilla. It's 18 by 18, no, it's 18 inches deep and then 30 inches wide, 30 inches tall. So it's going to give her a little more height, but more importantly, it's going to give her more width, more lateral space to work with, and I'm going to build her a much better canopy. I know she's not going to spend any time on the ground, but this gives her more space to work with there. So as I'm talking, hopefully I'm cutting in some of these frames of me building the enclosure. Super simple, just a few screws, these things come together. But I want this to be a bioactive enclosure. Now these enclosures, these screen enclosures from Zilla, they do have like a PVC bottom. It's not watertight, so it's not meant to really hold dirt or anything or soil, and I think maybe it's meant to hold like potted plants and whatnot. So at first I thought I would just seal that PVC and add a glass, or actually I should backtrack. I wanted a screen enclosure to allow more ventilation because I want to have a misting system as well as a fogging system, because I really want to try to mimic and replicate that sort of Madagascar rainforest, eastern lowland rainforest, if I remember correctly. It's been a few weeks since I've looked at this stuff, but where there's fog rolling in the morning with a lot of dew in the morning, as well as dew at night and fog at night, and then it dries out during the day. But because I want to add a fogger, I want to make sure I have adequate ventilation. So long story short, that's why I went with a screen enclosure. But I live in a very dry climate for probably 7 or 8 months of the year, or maybe more like 10 months of the year. So I need to seal off at least 3 sides. So I found corrugated plastic, which I used, and I sealed off the sides and the back, just siliconed it in place. Or actually I used No More Nails from LePage to sort of stick it in place, and then I used silicone to seal it. So that gave me a good plastic sides to just make sure the sealing off the ventilation through those 3 sides. But then the next thing I had to do was build a tray in the base to accommodate soil, drainage layer, plants, and whatnot. And so the first thing I did is I put glass sides around it. I cut the glass like a total noob. I think my glass cutter was dull and it looked terrible, but it doesn't really matter because nobody's going to see that anyway. So I siliconed glass on the 4 sides around, and then I siliconed that down to the PVC sort of plastic base. And I was hoping that was going to be enough to seal everything off. And I am going to add a background. The plastic is not going to be the official background. That's just going to be there. That's just sort of there to seal it off. So I did that. I siliconed the glass in, siliconed that to the PVC floor, and then I did my first test, water test, where I filled it up maybe halfway with just pure water, and just to see if it would hold water. Because you want it to be able to hold water. It's never going to be in a situation where it needs to hold that much water. It's just really dealing with like the little bit of a few centimeters of water that's in the drainage layer, but I still wanted to put it through sort of an extreme test, and then it leaked. So the reason it leaked is because the PVC base that I'm holding right here is very flexible, and it was just riveted in place on that bottom. And again, I kind of have to do a lot of modifications on this enclosure because, you know, I've talked to Ryan from Zilla, so I'm not trying to bash their product or anything. I just don't think this is meant to, or I shouldn't say I don't think. I know this is not meant for bioactive, so I needed to come up with another solution. And because this was so flexible, it would slightly bend and it would break the seal of the silicone, and then it was basically useless. Plus, I realized afterwards that I just don't think those rivets that were in this plastic base are strong enough to hold however many pounds of soil and plant and whatnot. I just had a feeling that this was just going to pop off as soon as I put any weight in it. So what I did is I pulled it off completely. I just knocked the rivets off, which were pretty easy. They just came off with a Phillips screwdriver and a hammer. Just gave them a few taps and they snapped the heads off. And then I went and picked up a piece of 5 or half-inch plywood or 5/8 plywood, I forget what it is, and painted it black just a little bit aesthetically. It will look better. And my goal now is to glue this to the bottom and screw it to the bottom just to give the base a lot more strength. Now, I'm hoping that works. At this point, I don't know. So that's my next task. And then I'm going to use pond liner on the inside. So my idea of putting soil directly into the enclosure is not going to work, just because now I'd have to seal this plywood and it doesn't make any sense. So what I'll do is I'm going to fasten this to the bottom securely, and I'm going to add pond liner in, and that will be my area to put drainage layer and soil and whatnot. So that's the next step. But before we do that, I got to get out of these nicer clothes and get into my work clothes. Both of these shirts, this one and the sweater, are available on animalsathome.ca/shop, and $5 does get donated to the Amazon Rainforest Conservancy. If you're a follower of my content, you know that I do support that charity and send donations on a usually a quarterly basis or so based off of the income from the channel. So if you do want to support them, you can head to the website and pick yourself up. So I'm gonna run a bead of No More Nails around the perimeter of this plywood, which is gonna stick to this frame. And this is a screen frame, it's not super strong, so hopefully the plywood does actually help stabilize the entire system a little bit. And then I'm gonna use screws and screw it into the metal frame. So the screws will kind of squeeze the glue into place, and hopefully this works. At this point I really don't know, because I just don't know if this frame is strong enough to be screwed into, but we will find out. Okay, so this piece of plywood has now been screwed in and it's glued on, and I don't even think I would recommend doing this. It didn't screw on very well. There's very little material in the frame to work with in terms of being able to screw it on. I did get a few good screws in. A lot of them were kind of not that good, and hopefully the glue does work. Although I believe this is going to be a lot sturdier than having that PVC with just rivets holding it. The entire system now, the entire frame is sitting on this plywood, which is good. That means this is going nowhere. I still do think I'm going to run a quick bead of silicone through the inside just to fix the plywood to the enclosure even more. The silicone is not really going to do anything in terms of sealing water, because we are going to have that pond liner in here, so the plywood's never going to be in contact with water. But I just, better safe than sorry, run a quick bead through. And then the other thing I need to do, move the camera back so you guys can see, as you saw earlier, I put that dark plastic on the front. I wanted to do that because I thought it would look kind of nice just seeing the plants grow out of just nothing. Like, you won't be able to see the soil, because the soil is sometimes dirty and, you know, you start seeing stuff down here. And I thought this would just look much cleaner. Whether or not it's going to look good in the end, I have no clue. But one of the downsides with this on the front is that I'm not going to be able to see how much water is sitting in my drainage layer. And one of the things, if you're using a mister and misting quite often with species that only drink from raindrops and whatnot, water can start to collect. So when I asked Josh Halter from the Bio Dude, he said it's okay to have water sitting in your drainage layer, but you don't want the water to be sitting so high that it's touching the bottom of the soil. Because as soon as you do that, you start developing anaerobic bacteria, and then your soil is going to go bad. So you do want to have at least a layer of air between the two. The thing is I'll have no clue. I won't be able to see how much water is there. So what I think I'm going to have to do is I'm actually going to have to drill through one of these sides through the glass and install a little bulkhead with a drain. That way periodically I can come and I can drain any excess water sitting in the drainage layer. So that's sort of my next step. So first I'm going to silicone the sides, and then I'm going to go see if I can drill glass. I've never done that before, so we'll see if that works out. Alright, so I just went to the store and I couldn't find any fittings to make a bulkhead out of, and I also didn't want to pay $45 for a single diamond coated drill bit or a hole saw, because they're on Amazon for super cheap, like 20 bucks, and you get a whole bunch of them. So I placed an order for those two things. So in the next episode or the next video we will drill the hole for the bulkhead, and I'll show you guys how I'm going to install that little drainage layer so I can, or sorry, the drain, so I can clean out the drainage layer if I need to. And then I will install the pond liner for the inside. And I can't think of what else we're going to do. I do need to install a background. Still working on that. Not 100% sure what I'm going to do with that yet. I do have a whole bunch of really cool pieces of wood decor that are going to go in here, likely like vertical like this, I'm hoping. So we're going to kind of solve that problem maybe in 1 or 2 videos from now. And I also built converted a humidifier, or like an ultrasonic humidifier, into a fogger. I've already filmed that, so that'll be in one of the next clips coming up. But for now, I'll leave you guys with that. I also bought plants. I have a bunch of plants, umbrella plants called bromeliads that are going to go in here too. So it's going to be an exciting project, but I'm going to just piece it out, and I have to wait for that stuff to come in the mail anyway. So until next time.